Our course focuses on key themes like language variation, which shows how language differs across groups and contexts, and identity, which relates to how language helps us express who we are. We'll also explore power dynamics embedded in language, the rich multilingual landscapes many communities navigate, and the role of discourse in shaping social realities. All of these elements come together to give us a comprehensive understanding of how language functions within society, making sociolinguistics a fascinating and vital area of study at the graduate level. Let's take a closer look at what sociolinguistics really is. Essentially, it's the scientific study of language as a social phenomenon. That means we're looking at how language functions within society, not just as a system of rules, but as something deeply connected to our social identities and interactions. We investigate how various social variables, like class, gender, age, ethnicity, and education, shape the way people choose to speak. For example, how someone's background influences their vocabulary, accent, or speech style. These choices aren't random. They often reflect their social position or group membership. Additionally, sociolinguistics examines patterns of variation across different speech communities. This helps us understand why people from different regions or social groups might speak differently, and what those differences mean culturally and socially. Another key area of study is language attitudes, ideologies, and power structures. We explore how people feel about different ways of speaking, what those attitudes reveal about social hierarchies, and how language can be a tool for power and identity. All of this ties into our overall theme, understanding language not just as a code, but as a social tool that shapes and reflects society. To do this, sociolinguistics draws on insights from linguistics, sociology, anthropology, and discourse studies, giving us a rich, interdisciplinary perspective on how language operates in social contexts. Let's take a closer look at the historical emergence of sociolinguistics. This field really took shape prominently in the 1960s and 1970s, a period of significant change and development. During this time, scholars started to react against the earlier focus on abstract structural linguistics, especially the Saussurian idea of langue, which emphasized the internal system of language rather than its use in real social contexts. One key figure was William Labov, who pioneered what we now call quantitative variationist sociolinguistics. His work focused on analyzing language variation in a systematic and empirical way, highlighting how social factors influence linguistic choices. Then there's Delheims, who introduced the ethnography of communication, a way of studying language within its cultural and social settings, emphasizing authentic interactions rather than decontextualized language data. Basil Bernstein also made important contributions with his theory of language and social class, showing how language use can reflect and reinforce social hierarchies. Overall, these developments marked a shift, moving away from looking at language as an isolated system and toward studying it in real, social contexts. This shift is really at the heart of what sociolinguistics is about, understanding how language functions in society, in everyday life, and in authentic interactions. Now, let's take a closer look at some of the key theoretical foundations that underpin our understanding of language variation and change. First, we have variationist theory, developed by William Labov. This approach emphasizes the systematic correlation between linguistic forms and social variables, meaning that the way people speak often varies depending on factors like social class, age, or ethnicity. It helps us see how social context influences language use in a very structured way. Next is the ethnography of communication, introduced by Delheims. This framework expands our view by focusing on the speaking model, which highlights aspects like setting, participants, ends, act, key, instrumentality, and norms. It also emphasizes the idea of communicative competence, knowing not just the language rules, but how to use language effectively in different social situations. This enriches our understanding of language as a social practice. Then we have social network theory from Milray. This theory looks at how dense or loose social networks shape language variation. Dense networks, with close-knit connections, tend to reinforce local speech patterns, while looser networks often facilitate change and innovation. It's a useful way to see how social ties influence linguistic diffusion. Moving on, critical sociolinguistics brings in a broader perspective by examining how language intersects with ideology and power. It asks us to consider how language can reinforce social inequalities or challenge them, highlighting the political dimension of linguistic choices. Finally, we have post-structuralist views, which see identity as discursively constructed. This perspective suggests that our sense of self is shaped through language and social discourse, emphasizing the fluidity and multiplicity of identity rather than fixed categories. All these theories connect to our overall theme by showing that language is not just about grammar or vocabulary. It's deeply intertwined with social identity, power, and culture. They provide a comprehensive foundation for understanding the complex ways language operates in society. Let's take a moment to explore some core concepts and key terminology in language variation. First, we have the speech community, which refers to a group of people who share common norms and expectations about how language should be used. This shared understanding helps create a sense of identity and cohesion within the group. Next, there's the idea of linguistic repertoire. This is essentially the range of language varieties or styles that speakers have at their disposal. It includes different accents, dialects, registers, and more, allowing speakers to adapt their language to different contexts. Now, when we talk about dialect versus accent, we're distinguishing between structural and phonological variation. A dialect includes differences in grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation, while an accent mainly refers to pronunciation differences. Both are important, but they serve different roles in language diversity. Moving on, register and style refer to how language varies depending on the context. For example, the way you speak in a formal setting is different from a casual conversation with friends. These variations help us communicate appropriately in different situations. Finally, we have standard language ideology. This concept relates to the prestige and authority often associated with a standard language, which is usually promoted by institutions and societal norms. It influences perceptions of correctness and legitimacy in language use. By understanding these core concepts, we can better appreciate how language functions within different communities and contexts, which ties directly into the overall theme of language variation and social identity. Let's talk about language variation. Now, variation isn't random. It's actually systematic and follows certain rules. It can be seen in different ways, like regional or geographical dialects, which means the way people speak can differ depending on where they are. It also varies socially, for example, based on class, ethnicity, or gender. Then there's stylistic variation, which refers to differences between formal and informal contexts. These variations happen across different levels of language, what we call linguistic variables, including phonological, morphological, syntactic, and lexical features. Importantly, these variations aren't just random quirks. They often serve as indicators of social meaning. In other words, how someone speaks can tell us a lot about their social identity and group membership. So, understanding language variation helps us see how language reflects and reinforces social structures and identities. It's a key part of understanding the broader picture of how language functions in society. Now, let's explore how language and social class are deeply interconnected. Socioeconomic stratification often shows up in the way people choose their words and pronunciation. For example, Labov's famous study in New York City focused on the pronunciation of the R sound. He found that individuals in higher social classes tend to use the prestige form, pronouncing the R more clearly, which is seen as a sign of social status. Sometimes, people even engage in hypercorrection, trying to sound more refined than they naturally are. Moving on, Bernstein's concept of restricted versus elaborated codes provides another lens. Restricted codes are often used within close-knit groups or among those with less educational exposure, while elaborated codes are more complex and are associated with higher educational levels and social classes. These differences can influence how effectively someone communicates in different social or academic settings. This naturally leads us to the educational implications of linguistic inequality. When students' language styles differ from the standard or academic language, it can impact their learning and their teachers' perceptions of their abilities. Finally, Bourdieu's idea of linguistic capital highlights that language itself is a form of symbolic power. The way someone speaks can open doors or create barriers. It's a form of social currency. Recognizing these connections helps us understand how language not only reflects social stratification, but also reproduces it. This understanding is crucial as we consider ways to promote more equitable communication and educational opportunities. Let's explore how language and gender are interconnected. First, there's the early dominance approach, which suggests that language reflects male power structures. This means that traditional ways of speaking often reinforce male authority and social dominance. Then, we have the difference approach, which sees gendered speech as part of subcultures, distinct ways of communicating that are tied to gender identities, but also shaped by culture and context. Moving on, the postmodern approach, particularly influenced by Judith Butler, views gender as performative. That is, gender is something we do through our language and actions, rather than something fixed or innate. Now, in everyday speech, certain features are often associated with gendered communication. Things like hedges, which soften statements, tag questions that turn statements into questions, and politeness strategies. These features can reflect social expectations about gender behavior. It's also important to recognize that gender doesn't exist in isolation. It intersects with class, ethnicity, and personal identity, making the way we speak even more complex and layered. All of these approaches highlight that language is a powerful tool in shaping and expressing gender identities, connecting to the broader themes of how language influences social structures and individual identities. Let's take a closer look at how language and age interact. First, we have the concept of age grading versus generational change. Age grading suggests that people tend to adopt certain language styles at specific ages, almost like a temporary phase, while generational change refers to deeper, long-term shifts in language that occur as new generations emerge. Now, adolescents often act as innovators of linguistic change. They tend to experiment with new words, slang, and ways of speaking, which can influence wider language use over time. This is also closely tied to youth identity construction, where slang and specific language styles help young people establish who they are and differentiate themselves from older generations. In terms of how we study these changes, apparent time studies are really useful. They look at different age groups at a single point in time to see how language varies across generations. This helps us understand whether language change is happening because of age-related factors or actual shifts between generations. Finally, intergenerational linguistic shifts highlight that language evolves across generations, not just within an individual's lifetime. These shifts are crucial for understanding the ongoing evolution of language as a reflection of social and cultural changes over time. All of these points connect back to our overall theme of how language is dynamic, constantly shaped by social factors, age, and identity. Let's explore the fascinating world of bilingualism and multilingualism. First, we have individual versus societal bilingualism. This distinction is important because it helps us understand whether people speak multiple languages on a personal level, or if a whole community or society functions with several languages. Next, there's code switching, which is when speakers shift between languages or dialects within a conversation. This can be functional, serving specific purposes, or tied to identity, expressing who we are or where we come from. Moving on, we encounter code mixing and translanguaging. These are more fluid language practices where speakers blend elements from different languages seamlessly, often to better express themselves or navigate their social worlds. Then, there's diglossia, a concept introduced by Ferguson, which describes the coexistence of high and low language varieties. Think of formal versus informal speech. Both are essential but serve different social functions. We also need to consider language maintenance, shift, and death. Languages can be sustained over generations, shift as communities adopt new languages, or unfortunately, die out when they are no longer transmitted. Finally, in post-colonial societies, multilingual realities are especially complex and rich. These societies often have multiple languages intertwined due to historical, social, and political factors, leading to unique linguistic landscapes. Throughout this presentation, understanding these concepts helps us appreciate the diversity and complexity of language use around the world, highlighting how language shapes identity, culture, and society at large. Let's talk about language and identity. As we've seen, language serves as a powerful marker of ethnic, national, and religious identity. It helps us signal where we come from and what communities we belong to. But it's important to remember that identity isn't fixed. It's dynamic and constantly being negotiated through discourse. We're always shaping and reshaping how we see ourselves and how others see us through our language choices. Now, a key concept here is indexicality. This is about how specific linguistic forms can signal social meanings, like showing someone's age, social class, or cultural background just through how they speak. It's fascinating how much social information is embedded in our language without us even realizing it. Style shifting is another important aspect. This is when we change our way of speaking depending on the context or audience. It's a way of performing different facets of our identity. For example, someone might speak formally in a professional setting, but switch to a more relaxed style with friends. When we consider diaspora communities, we often see hybrid linguistic identities. These are unique blends of languages and dialects that reflect a community's complex history and cultural interactions. They show how identities are constantly evolving through language contact and social experience. All these points highlight that language isn't just communication. It's a dynamic, discursive tool that shapes, reflects, and negotiates our identities within society, connecting back to the larger theme of how language is intertwined with who we are. Let's explore how language, ideology, and power are interconnected. First, language ideology influences how we perceive what is correct or prestigious in speech. This means that certain ways of speaking are often seen as more valid or valuable than others. For example, there's the idea of standard language ideology, which promotes a particular variety of language as the correct form, and unfortunately, this can lead to the marginalization of non-standard dialects or varieties. This brings us to linguistic discrimination and accent prejudice, where people might be unfairly judged or even stereotyped based on how they speak or their accent. It's a clear example of how language ties into social power and inequality. Next, we have language policy and planning, which includes decisions about the status of languages, the development of language corpora, and how languages are taught and learned. These policies can reinforce or challenge existing power structures, shaping who has access to education and opportunities. Finally, critical discourse analysis helps us understand how language use reflects and sustains power relations in society. By examining the way language is employed in different contexts, we can uncover underlying ideologies and social hierarchies. All these points highlight that language isn't just about communication. It's deeply embedded in social dynamics and power. Understanding this helps us see the broader implications of language choices and policies in shaping society. Let's take a closer look at some of the key methodological approaches used in sociolinguistic research. First, we have quantitative variationist analysis, which relies on statistical correlation to identify patterns and relationships in language data. This approach helps us understand how social factors influence language variation in a measurable way. Next are sociolinguistic interviews and rapid anonymous surveys. These methods are valuable for gathering direct insights from speakers, whether through in-depth conversations or quick surveys that maintain anonymity, encouraging more honest responses. We also have ethnographic fieldwork and participant observation. These approaches allow us to immerse ourselves in the community, observing language use in natural settings and gaining a deeper cultural context behind linguistic choices. discourse analysis, and conversation analysis focus on the structure and flow of language in real interactions. They help us uncover how meaning is constructed and negotiated in everyday conversations. Corpus linguistics is another powerful tool, which involves analyzing large collections of texts to identify patterns and trends across extensive data sets. Finally, many researchers adopt mixed method approaches, combining these various techniques to achieve a more comprehensive understanding of language phenomena. All these methods, when integrated, connect to the overarching goal of our research: to understand the complex ways language varies and functions within social contexts. Let's take a look at some of the most current trends shaping the landscape of language today. First, globalization and the rise of world Englishes are really transforming how we think about English as a global language. Instead of a single, uniform language, we now see many varieties that reflect local cultures and identities. This naturally connects to English as a lingua franca, or ELF, which is the use of English as a common means of communication across diverse language backgrounds. ELF highlights how English functions as a bridge, fostering international cooperation and understanding. Moving on, digital sociolinguistics and online discourse are also reshaping language use. The internet has created new spaces where language evolves rapidly. Think social media, online forums, and virtual communities. These platforms influence how we communicate and even how language norms develop over time. We also need to consider language endangerment and revitalization efforts. Many languages are at risk of disappearing, but there are vibrant movements working to preserve and revive these linguistic heritages, emphasizing the importance of linguistic diversity. Migration, mobility, and superdiversity are further transforming language landscapes. Increased movement of people across borders leads to multilingual communities where languages blend and adapt in fascinating ways. This superdiversity enriches our societies, but also presents new challenges and opportunities for language policy and education. Finally, post-colonial linguistic realities remind us that language histories are deeply intertwined with colonial histories. The legacy of colonialism continues to influence language use, identity, and power dynamics around the world. All these trends are interconnected and reflect the dynamic, ever-evolving nature of language in our globalized digital age. They remind us that language is not static, but constantly shaped by social, cultural, and political forces. In conclusion, sociolinguistics plays a crucial role by bridging the micro-level interactions we observe daily with the larger social structures that shape society. It shows us that the way people speak is not random. Instead, linguistic variation carries deep social meaning and is systematically structured. This means that language both reflects social inequalities, like class, ethnicity, or gender, and also helps to construct and reinforce those inequalities. What's really powerful about sociolinguistics is that it provides us with analytical tools to study discourse, identity, and even policymaking. These tools help us understand how language influences social dynamics and how we might address issues of inequality through language policies. Furthermore, this field lays a strong foundation for more advanced research, whether at the master's or PhD level. It opens up many possibilities for exploring how language shapes society and how we can use this understanding to foster social change. Overall, sociolinguistics is essential for anyone interested in the intersection of language, society, and power. Thank you all for your time and attention today. I really appreciate your engagement and interest in the topics we've covered. Remember, the key takeaway is how these concepts can be applied to make a meaningful impact in your work and projects. I hope this presentation has inspired new ideas and perspectives for you. If you have any questions or want to discuss further, please don't hesitate to reach out. Once again, thank you so much for being here and for your participation.